Thanks for tuning in to Murder News, the true crime cult for the latest breaking news, murdering memes, TV reviews, podcast recommendations, and all things spooky. Come join us at our spacious cult farm as we make flower crowns, pet some baby goats, and solve some cold cases. I'm television's Aurora Katie.
And I'm your online murder friend, Angelina. Cults are no fun alone, so don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and tell all of your true crime friends to join the commune at murder.news. This is the Week in True Crime. The past weekend, the community of a residential neighborhood in Indianapolis was rocked by a tragedy that IMPD Chief Randall Taylor is calling the largest mass casualty shooting in more than a decade. Just before 4 a.m., police were called to the 3300 block of East 36th Street with a report of a person shot. When they arrived, they found a 15-year-old boy suffering from gunshot wounds and rushed him to the hospital, where he is now in critical condition but expected to survive. In what seemed at first to be a separate incident, police uncovered 6 bodies in a home on the 3500 block of Adams Street, all of whom appeared to have been shot. The victims were identified by the Marion County coroner as Rita Childs, 13, Elijah Childs, 18, Kezzie and Raymond Childs Jr., both 42, and Kiara Hawkins, 19, who was 9 months pregnant. Kiara was rushed to the hospital as soon as she was discovered on the scene, but unfortunately both her and her unborn child were pronounced dead on arrival. Police put out a bulletin searching for family members who were missing from the scene. The family's 15-year-old son was discovered to be the gunshot victim found on East 36th Street and rushed to the hospital. The teen helped authorities connect the dots and piece together what had happened. He explained that it was his older brother who attacked the family after getting into an argument with their father. The 17-year-old was being scolded for having gone out without permission when he opened fire on his parents, then went after his siblings downstairs. At this point, the 15-year-old brother fled the house, hoping to get help from a neighbor. His brother chased after him, shooting, and it was those 4 shots that were fired outside the house that made neighbors sure that what they were hearing was gunshots and inspired them to call the police. Investigators tracked the shooter to Plainfield, where he was taken into custody on Monday, just 24 hours after the attack took place. WRTV's Rafael Sanchez reported that the 17-year-old suspect has been arrested on initial charges of murder and intentional manslaughter with a handgun and attempted murder, but the Marion County Prosecutor's Office has not yet announced official charges. At this point, the attacker's name and identifying details are not being shared by police because he is a juvenile. The teen is currently being housed in the Marion County Juvenile Detention Facility and is expected to eventually be tried as an adult. 2020 was a record year for homicide in Indianapolis, but 2021 is already outpacing the year before with 21 homicides so far. In an announcement on Sunday, IMPD Chief Randall Taylor said, "Just this last week, we talked about investments that we're making, resources we're devoting to stopping crime and violence here in Indianapolis. Drug-related crimes, domestic violence, violence driven by poverty or desperation. But what we saw this morning was a different kind of evil." I am not entirely sure that it was. Of course, we're still learning more as the details unfold, but I find it unlikely that this was a random act committed by an inexplicably evil teenager. But not much is certain about this case in particular, as the details are still unfolding and the juvenile suspect is still awaiting trial. Like in every murder case, it's important to address the cause of the situation if we want to reduce the mounting statistics on gun violence and mass murders in America. Authorities in Indianapolis and across America continue to examine the factors that might be contributing to these statistics, like gun culture, mental illness, drugs, and abuse. Meanwhile, newer factors like depression and poverty that have been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic are also coming into play. My sources for this story include the local outlets in Indianapolis like WRTV and Wayne.com, as well as national news on CNN and the Washington Post. You can find all the links in the details below, as well as the link to a GoFundMe page created for the family to cover funeral expenses.
In very big true crime news, a victim of the Green River Killer was finally identified on Monday after her body was discovered 37 years ago. Her remains were found in a swamp behind a Little League baseball field near Seattle-Tacoma International Airport in 1984. In 1984, the manager of the baseball field's dog had been playing in the field and came home with what looked like a human bone. Shortly after, the police found the decomposed remains of a young girl estimated to be 12 years old at the time. Her bones were found mostly intact and in a fetal position. Since they didn't know the identity of the victim, investigators referred to her as Bones 10, which later became Jane Doe B10. Dr. Kathy Taylor, a forensic anthropologist in Kings County, Washington, has sought to find the identity of the remains for almost 25 years. Using DNA extracted from bone fragments, the DNA Doe Project, which by the way does the most amazing work, if you're able to, please donate to the project. We're going to include a link down below. Well, the DNA Doe Project uses extracted DNA to develop a familial genetic profile to help King County investigators identify the remains. The victim has now been identified as Wendy Stevens. Wendy was 14 years old when she ran away from home in Denver, Colorado in 1983. Here's a side-by-side of the composite that was done of Wendy based on her remains versus an actual picture of her. They're actually pretty eerily similar. It's fascinating. Her body was discovered in March of the following year. As it turns out, Wendy's mother has never stopped looking for her and actually uploaded her own DNA to GEDmatch in February 2019 in hopes of finding her daughter. This must have been an absolute worst case scenario for her, but we do hope that finding an answer has somehow brought her some closure. But also, how terrible. Wendy is now thought to be the youngest victim of Gary Ridgway, who is also known as the Green River Killer. Ridgway is believed to have murdered 71 girls and women throughout the 80s and 90s near Seattle and Tacoma, Washington. He specifically targeted sex workers and girls in vulnerable circumstances, including runaways. We're going to do a bit of a deeper dive into the Green River Killer's victims and a possible tie-in to Ted Bundy on this week's episode of our brand new podcast, Murder Murder News Listen Edition. So be sure to tune in today for more information. I also wanted to thank this week's sources, which of course are linked down below, and those were the Seattle Times, Q13 Fox, and Wikipedia.
Yes, you heard that right. We have some big news. We have expanded into the podcast realm. Our brand new podcast is available for download everywhere you get your podcasts. Each week, we'll take a much deeper dive into recent true crime cases, plus discuss the latest trends in true crime, from documentaries to books to other podcasts you should be listening to. The first 2 episodes are now available, so we've got your afternoon planned for you. Head to your preferred platform. We've provided links in the details below, and make sure to follow our show and download all your fave episodes. Leave us a review so we know how we're doing.
We are so excited to have Andrew and Maddie with us from this week's favorite podcast, Frigay the 13th Horror Podcast. Love that name so much. Frigay the 13th explores horror in real life and in movies, all from the LGBTQIA perspective. Maddie and Andrew, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
Hi.
Hi, everybody.
Awesome.
Doing
We're so excited
good.
to have you.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting us. We truly appreciate it.
Seriously, for real.
Great. Well, I love your show. And one of the things I love most about it is that you start off each episode with the most terrifying things that happened in real life. So like whatever's happening in the media, that's just really scary and we'd like to hide from. You start with that and then you go into horror in the media. Such a great idea. So how did the two of you meet and what inspired you to start your show together?
So Andrew and I have known each other for a long time. Andrew, what year was it? You came in?
2012, I think. Yeah, that sounds about right.
So Andrew's husband, Michael, who's also our producer, by the way, we've been friends for a very long time. We've known each other since college. We both moved to Chicago around the same time. Andrew came into our lives when he met Michael, of course, and made my life even better too. And we're great friends, and it's a lot of fun. we've been friends for a long time, and when we thought about making our show about our podcast, it was honestly kind of like a joke to start with. I mean, being totally honest with you, like we like to hang out and have many adult beverages, and we like to talk about two main things: scary stuff and political stuff.
Right.
And there was just this one night, I don't remember exactly what night it was, Andrew, you might, but we were like, what if we just started a podcast about this? And Andrew had been really into listening to horror podcasts for a while. And there was just one Sunday morning where we said, you know what, let's just do this. And we got up, and Michael and Andrew and I all met at this bar pretty close to where we live in Chicago. And we just spent a day sort of dreaming and thinking about what the podcast could be and putting together a little intro. And then it's just slowly evolved from there. It's been a really beautiful thing. I said at the start of this, it started as kind of a joke. It's ended up very much not so.
Right.
What we discovered in making this podcast and creating this is that there's a community of people out there who were looking for exactly what we were offering. A lot of queer horror fans and non-queer horror fans also, who were looking for the perspective that we could bring to the table, thinking about how we deal with horror, not just when we watch it on the screen, but also when we actually deal with it in real life. And we've just been really pleasantly surprised at the response that we've gotten. It's something that we're really proud of, because we feel like we've really helped to build a community of people. And it's just, I don't know, it's a really amazing thing. Andrew, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think when we first started this, it was kind of just out of frivolity and just having fun. And then like slowly over time, as we started tackling harder topics like college rape cases, all kinds of different trans lives matter, all these different things that we started to talk about, we started hearing from people saying, this means so much to me that you guys would shed light on these things. And then really, kind of point a mirror back from horror and say, horror is just not just a getaway. It's not something you just watch on screen and say goodbye to. It's a mirror to our world, and we wanted to kind of show that. And that's kind of why we take our horror in real life segment and pair it with movies that really do go along with that same topic.
Yeah, I love that combination, because it's not like you're just talking about things going on in the news and then going into a completely random horror movie. It's a good mashup and a good way to tell the story that the two are interconnected. Like, that's very smart.
Thanks.
Oh, thank you.
Love that. You guys are both very smart, obviously.
Well, we try.
You're like, yes. So what is your horror origin? What got you into horror movies in the first place?
It's a great question. Looking back at my childhood, I think a big part of it was growing up Catholic, to be honest with you. There's a great deal of mystery and myth when you grow up Catholic. It's it's a very old religion, no matter what we think about it, right? I'm no longer Catholic, but looking at it, it's pretty ancient. There's a lot of tales of ghosts when you grow up Catholic. There's a lot of tales of demons and things lurking around you. And I think as a kid, I was really drawn to that mystery. It's something that you really think about all the time when you get raised Catholic. And like growing up, my mom refused to let a copy of The Exorcist enter our front door. So when I was able to sneak it in, either from my older siblings or from my friends, it was something like, wow, I feel a connection to this. And The Exorcist, for example, is my favorite horror movie. And I think it really is because it does draw back to my childhood, to when I really did believe you could be possessed by a demon, and what would that be like? And thinking about my family talking about that and hearing tales of the old country from where my family's from, Croatia and from Italy. I want to talk about some old wives' tales. They are there big time. So I think for me, that's kind of the start of my horror origin. I think the other part of the puzzle for me is being queer. Growing up gay, you grow up feeling like you're something other than the people around you when you grow up in a small place like I did, and like Andrew did too. And I think it's really natural for queer people to feel sort of a kinship to horror, to feel like that character that is also the other that is going through a really intense situation, I've kind of felt like that myself, you know? And so being drawn into it, I think was made even more intense by just the very nature of my identity.
That makes so much sense. And it's interesting pointing out, especially the Catholic element. Um, I didn't grow up Catholic, and it's not something I've had a lot of experience with. My family was Christian, and there's still some spooky stuff in there. But I've recently been watching The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina on Netflix. I'm not sure if y'all have covered that or whatever. But it's funny because when I watched the first couple of episodes, I was sort of shocked by and I'm not a religious person, so like it wasn't that, but I was kind of like shocked at some of like the use of Satanism, I think in kind of an abusive way. I don't think that really represents what their church stands for. But then I was like, I think they're literally just using all of the Catholic rites and all of their things with demons and exorcists and such, and instead of having God putting Satan in there, I was like, I think it's the exact replica of what the Catholic Church used to be like, or maybe it still is. I don't know.
Too far.
Yeah. So it's not that shocking. It's kind of wild. And Andrew, how about you? What's your origin?
So I kind of come from a family of horror lovers. I remember when I was very young, my grandma would always watch Tales from the Crypt every Friday night.
Yes.
My mom, would watch horror movies. My uncle would sneak me off to, the theater to go watch horror movies. So it's kind of become from like a family perspective. And it kind of, I could distinctly remember one night when the It miniseries TV was airing on TV. I was like sneaking out in the hallway, like trying to watch it. Well, my mom thought it was too scary for me.
Yes.
So it's just, I always remember loving horror. And, we used to go to our local video store on Friday nights. I had at this time 4 step siblings, and we would all get to pick out a movie, and inevitably it would always be from the horror section for me, whether it was Candyman or Scream or any of those ones that came out in kind of the late 80s, and through the 90s. I sucked them all up, and like I loved it ever since I was a kid.
Such great picks. And sometimes I forget about it.
Mm-hmm.
And especially like the original, like I saw the newer version, and it's scary, but I think because I saw the original miniseries as a kid, I can't even think about it. Like
Yeah.
it's too scary for me. It's too much. Like I remember watching it with my sister as a kid, and my parents were out of town, and we were going to both not sleep in our separate rooms, but sleep in their room and watch scary movies. And we slept not 1 minute that night. Like we were so terrified. It's still the scariest thing I can possibly imagine.
Yeah, there's something about that miniseries and the time it was made and when it aired and how TV movie quality grimy it is, that when you watch the newer one, it almost feels too polished. When you go the old one, it just, and this may be nostalgia talking, of course, but it just always scared me so much more when I was a kid.
I totally get that. And my husband and I were watching, kind of revisiting some horror movies. We watched Pet Sematary. We watched the original from the 80s. And there's a different feel of horror movies in the 80s from now. I feel like they go for less jump scares, and they are kind of more refined and maybe a little bit like easier to watch for that reason. But we were joking that if Stephen King was on set, you can almost feel like the drugs, like the cocaine coursing through his veins, because there's so much intensity that's brought to it. And like every scene, there's a truck speeding through and hitting a kid or a cat getting killed or something. And I think that movies from our childhood were a lot more intense.
Yeah, well, if you want to see him and his most cocained out, just watch Maximum Overdrive.
Oh, I will. That's awesome. I'll write that down. So you've had some really great episodes. Some of my favorites are your Christmas special you had recently, which covered Better Watch Out, which was really fascinating. I thought that was great. And your episode on domestic violence and gaslighting, where you covered one of my all-time favorites, What Lies Beneath. What's your favorite episode you've had so far?
We've had a lot of great episodes. we actually have a running joke after we finish recording, which, it takes like 3 or 4 hours. We always look at each other and go, best one yet. But for me, what makes a great episode, right? More than just like both of us being prepared, being ready, feeling like we're really present when we're doing the recording, paying attention to each other, listening to each other, and putting together good content, of course. What makes a great episode is when people respond to it, right? I mean, we're podcasters, so like, it's not like I just like put up a billboard and hope somebody looks at it, or like put a painting up somewhere. Like, it's meant to be responded to. It's meant to be heard, and it's meant to like have a reaction. And so the community that we've built, and largely it's been Andrew on Twitter, like really working hard to build a really great Twitter community. When they respond to the issues that we're talking about, we know we've hit something right. And I think that we've done a really good job on our show of not bashing people over the head with the issue of the day. We're really careful about not going straight into what's happening this week, but sort of talking around it, right? And finding a way into it. Like when we talked about when Harvey Weinstein, that whole Me Too business was really fermenting for the first big time, we didn't like dive into it right away. We made sure that like there was some time around it. We made sure that we found a way into it that people could feel along with us. You know what I mean? I think picking out some of my favorite episodes, I think our first Pride episode was really well done. Andrew did really great work in bringing together different audio from some of our community members and fans that they sent into us about their own coming out experiences and what that was like for them. And the first segment of our show was us talking about, what it means to be queer in today's America, in today's world. How it's not as like rosy as a lot of people might think, but then like going right into our listeners, our fans, into their experiences and having that showcase so that we could amplify their voices too. I think that was a really smart choice on our part. And I think it was a really impactful episode. That's how I would put it. I think some other ones for us, talking about sexual violence and domestic violence. The college rape episode was, I think, pretty deep for us to go into, and also pretty personal. Other than that, I think the episode that we had on cruises was actually really great. And like, it's one of those things where, you have a podcast like ours and people are like, you did an episode on cruises? And we're like, hell yes, we did.
I get
it.
And
it's great. You gotta listen. We had somebody on the episode, one of our friends, her name is Maria, and she was on one of the cruise ships during COVID. And so she was able to give this first person account of what that was like, and to really describe, the terror of that in a way that maybe people hadn't heard before.
Right.
So I think that was pretty hard hitting too. But I mean, God, I can't pick out just one. Andrew, what are yours?
I kind of strike a weird balance with the ones that I truly enjoy, because there are certain ones that the research is a little lighter and we get just to have a little bit more fun. Like we did our annual Halloween episode is usually always something either like haunted houses or ghost stories or things like that. So
one.
I love doing those because it's more just us being able to be ourselves and talk about the things that we like. But then I also love when we hit on a subject that I didn't think I would find anything interesting. And then in doing research and finding stuff, you find out so much. I mean, when we did our Cursed Casts episode, we covered the Poltergeist trilogy, but then we also learned about like 902, the curse of 90210, and how all of those cast members have gone through so much in their lives as far as like family members dying or horrible accidents. And that was really interesting to me. And then there are episodes like Cursed Objects that we did that I really enjoyed doing all the research on, just because I think what we do really well is we both kind of go into our separate corners. We don't tell each other really what we're going to be coming back with. And then when we come back together, it's always something different, which is amazing to me. So for instance, on our serial killers episode, which surprisingly we've only done one serial killer episode so far, but we learned about this British serial killer that went after only gay men. And that was something that I had no idea. So just stuff like that always leads to kind of my favorite episodes to do. But yeah, like Maddie said, the ones that really like get back to me are when people, you know, through Instagram or through Twitter, DM us and say like, hey, this was a really, you know, interesting topic for me, or I've gone through what you guys were talking about and it really made a huge impact that you guys would talk about it. I also love when we get guests to come on, because it's always unique to hear from, you know, different people, either in the horror industry or from the LGBTQIA sector. So I just love all of them, to be honest, if I'm honest. And
Yeah.
it's really afforded us some really great interviews as well. I mean, if you would have told me, you know, 3 years ago when we started this thing that we would be interviewing people like Jerry O'Connell and Mark Patton and you know, some big names, I would have laughed in your face. But you know, we've made steady climbs up and we've made a lot of great connections, and it's really paid off for us, I think.
That's so amazing. And I have not heard about the 90210 curse. I haven't listened to that episode yet, but that's what I'm doing after this, because what?
Yeah, it's pretty crazy when you break it all down.
Yeah. Wow. Those poor things. That sounds terrible, but also really intriguing.
Yeah.
Harry, rest in peace.
Yes. Well, it has been such a pleasure having you both as guests on the show. Can you please let our viewers know where they can find you on social media?
Sure thing. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram with the same handle as @Frigay13. That's FRIGAY13. Search for us on Facebook, Frigay the 13th Horror Podcast. Find us online at our website, www.frigay13.com. You can also listen to us anywhere that you already listen to podcasts. So just search for us there. You will find us. If you're interested in looking at our Patreon or anything else, feel free to. We would always love to have your support. And Aurora, thank you for having us on the show. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And don't forget to subscribe to Frigay the 13th, wherever you listen to podcasts, so you don't miss a single episode. This week, we're watching Florida Man Murders on Oxygen. This show features some of Florida's most outrageous and notorious killers, all from, you guessed it, Florida. The 4-part series covers cases like a car bombing in Naples, Florida, and a very deadly love triangle. Be sure to tune into Florida Man Murders on Oxygen and let us know what you think of the show in the details down below.
We love reading your comments, so long as you aren't a troll, and we wanted to thank Emily for commenting that she loves spending her Friday night with us and just started Night Stalker. Thanks so much, Emily.
Thanks to David, who said he also loves to scream into the void. David, we can't wait to all scream together at the MMN Goat Farm.
Thanks so much for tuning into This Week in True Crime with Murder Murder News. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button below, give us a thumbs up, and tell all of your true crime friends.
Help support Murder Murder News by joining our brand new Patreon at patreon.com/murdermurdernews. We have some great benefits like merch, a shout out on our YouTube and podcast, exclusive episodes, and early access to tickets for our live online events. Your support helps us produce our weekly show and help support our amazing writers that keep you up to date with the latest breaking news every day on murdermurder.news. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. See you next week.